guys may not have a lot of experience quite yet dealing with boards and insurance renewals and just general insurance questions or claims. But what I wanted to do today, I don't know if you pay a lot of attention to what goes up on y'all's community blog.
Yes.
But there's a 10-question sort of Q&A for insurance. And that's sort of what we're going to review today and just kind of sort of talk through it. I could have brought a policy up here and we could go line by line, but that gets real boring real quick. What you guys need to know and what I felt like you need to know is when you guys get asked a question, you guys want to be able to respond, quickly, and be informative, accurately. So that's what I'm kind of going to go through today. It's the top 10 questions I get asked from folks like you throughout the country on insurance questions from board members. So I'll get this put up on the screen.
So BJ, are you a broker?
I am a broker. I work for Arthur J. Gallagher. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. We're the third largest now, depending on who's acquiring who. But we compete with other brokers like Marsh, Willis, Aon. We're in that category. We're based out of Chicago. I think we have 130, 140 offices across the globe. We're international. I think we've just made a big acquisition down in South America and in Australia. So we are everywhere. Most people ask us, are you the guy that busts the watermelon and the comedian? We're not that guy. We're a large insurance brokerage. What Gallagher asked me to do is focus on one or two things and be really good at it and go wherever you need to go to do it. About 10 years ago, I got heavily involved in real estate, and specifically within real estate, condos, association type risk. I insure probably 400 to 500 different associations from Florida up to Maryland, D.C. area. Primarily working with about 3 or 4 different management companies. So what I like to do is come in and meet all the managers, be helpful to them. I can't promise you I can insure every single association. There's some associations we've looked at here that I'm surprised they can get insurance, just with the number of claims. So we'll talk a little bit about what a good risk is, some of these questions, everything else. But yeah, so I belong to CAI. Is anybody familiar with Community Association Institute? Go to a lot of their local meetings back in North Carolina, but we do also the national meetings. Going on my way to the CIRMS designation, which is the Certified Insurance or Community Insurance Risk Specialist, Risk Management Specialist. And I'm nearly to the point where I can get that designation. There's only about 100 or so in the country, so I think I'd be the only one in North Carolina. I think there's about 10 to 15 folks up in the Mid-Atlantic area. But that's a designation I'm going after through CAI. So we try to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on legislatively, which can be difficult because every state has their own legislation, but we try to keep up with everything up here. I think recently you guys have had some dog bite legislation from community associations. I think it's finally been passed that the community shouldn't be held liable for individual dog owners' vicious dog. But we try to keep our finger on the pulse of that. We try to keep our finger on the pulse of the marketplace so that we can give you guys an idea of what to expect from the insurance year in, year out. So with that being said, we'll sort of jump into our...
So can I ask one last question? What does CIC stand for?
Certified Insurance Counselor. That is, it's sort of a graduate degree from your normal insurance person. It's about a 3 to 5 year process of getting that designation. The CPCU is the MBA or the doctorate of the insurance world, and that is a lengthy process that not everybody can spend the time to do, but CIC is a good designation too. And I think...
Thank you. Sorry.
That's working or not. Well, either way, we'll work off the paper. So to get started, we'll talk about just the Q&A, what I get asked, and then we can do some question and answer from you guys at the end. But number one question we always get asked, and we've talked about the rain that you guys have been getting up here lately, is flood covered. Flood is always excluded under every policy unless you specifically endorse it on. In some cases, they won't even endorse it on. You have to go through the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. You can always get a flood quote. What we'll do is we'll go and figure out what flood zones you're in, what elevate. Came on good. Can you guys see that?
Not really.
Sort of. I don't know how to make it brighter. All this is on this paper here, so but flood is a common exclusion. It's one of the few common exclusions that we have, along with earthquake. So flood, if you have any questions ever get asked to you, do we have flood coverage? The safe answer is always, it's not on your main policy. If you want it, we have to get it quoted separately. It's not an expensive coverage. You can get it quoted separately unless they're in a flood zone. If they back up to a river that's prone to flooding, you may have some expense then. But in most cases, if flood is required or they want flood, it's because a bank is telling them they need flood. Usually the banks...
I'm sorry, that's usually because they're in a flood zone.
They're in a flood zone and the bank wants to protect their interest in that property. We've been asked a few times from a couple of different managers, and I think we may even have flood on a couple of different properties here. I have to go back and check specifically which ones. But it is something we can get quoted for you. So if you ever get a question, hey, are we covered for flood? The safe answer is no, it's a common exclusion under your insurance policy. If you want it, we can get it quoted. And you just call the agent, or if I'm the agent, call me. We can certainly help you out. Does that answer all the flood questions? That's usually an easy one, but with all the rain that we've been getting lately, it's a good one. You'll probably get asked.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot.
The next one is, what is co-insurance? Everybody thinks of co-insurance as well, my health plan, I've got to pay 20% of whatever the cost is. Co-insurance on the property side is completely different. In fact, co-insurance is a bad word in most cases with property insurance. You don't want co-insurance. Co-insurance basically says if you have $1 million building, it costs $1 million to replace, and you have 80% co-insurance, what the insurance policy says is you need to at least carry $800,000 of coverage in order to have even a partial claim covered fully. So if you have a $1 million building, you have 80% co-insurance, you're supposed to carry $800,000, but you only carried $500,000. When you have a claim, they come in and do a math problem. And they come in and go, well, you should have had this, you only carried this, you divide it all out, we're only going to pay you 60% of that claim. So if you have a $50,000 water damage claim, they're going to come in and go, well, you didn't have it insured to value, our co-insurance penalty is going to kick in, we're only going to pay partial to that claim. So you don't want co-insurance. You want agreed value, which is what we tend to put on just about every association that we manage for you guys or insure for you guys. Agreed value says, Mr. or Miss Underwriter, we have $1 million building. We're going to insure it for $1 million. You're going to pay us, if we have a $50,000 claim, there's not going to be a calculation. We agree that $1 million is the right amount. The problem with co-insurance is you could be at 80%. Going back to our $1 million building example. 80% co-insurance on $1 million building is $800,000. Let's say you carried $800,000. Well, inflation costs go through the roof. Next year, you're carrying $800,000, still on $1 million building. That $1 million building now costs $1.2 million to replace. Now you're out of whack. You're not carrying the right percentage, and you get penalized. So agreed value is just a better way to do it. So if you ever see a policy that says 80 or 90 or even worse, 100% co-insurance, tell the agent, no, we need agreed value, or get me an option for agreed value. Anybody have any questions on co-insurance? Don't want it. The other thing that I'll recommend too, and what's been helpful to some of the managers in the past, if you ever get a policy that you're not quite sure what the language means and you just want a neutral opinion, if you can email it to me, I'll tell you, I can look at it right away. I've been doing this for 16 years. I know exactly where to look and what to ask for. Question 3, does my insurance provide coverage if we serve wine, beer, liquor at a community function? I get this question a lot in Charlotte because every community has a community pool. and everybody wants to bring beer to the pool, or or they have a Christmas party, probably up here, if they have a Christmas party, they want to have beer and wine. What I suggest, first and foremost, is never charge for it. Never have a cash bar that the association's charging for it. We automatically include what we call host liquor liability. Everybody's heard of the convenience store that gets sued for selling the beer to the drunk guy that goes down the road and kills somebody. That's called liquor liability or dram shop law. Community associations have a similar exposure, but they're not selling it or making the liquor or the beer or the wine. They're just providing it. So what we consider that is a host liquor liability. What host liquor liability says, as long as you're not selling it or manufacturing it, or it doesn't require a license to have, then we cover the liquor liability. So the only thing to note here is avoid it at all costs. I mean, when you can. If it's not necessary to be at a function, it's better to not have it. Make it a BYOB if you want to.
So even with the BYOB, the host liquor liability.
The host liquor liability,
cover the
yes.
BYOB because that's yours.
Yeah, and typically I would say, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would say that there would be limited exposure there because it wasn't the association bringing it. They just didn't not allow it. But yeah, so if you get Christmas party questions, hey, we want to have, at our clubhouse, we want to have, wine tasting or anything, something like that. That's fine. Just don't charge for it.
So they wouldn't be held responsible if that person?
They could be held responsible, but we have coverage that would kick in as long as they're not selling it or manufacturing it. So the second they, I'll give you an example. You've probably heard this before. Can't remember the name of the insurance carrier, but there was a homeowner's policy, an HO3 policy, that negated coverage. It was a high school student having a party.
In the news, was that in the news?
Yeah, they were having a party. Parents left for the weekend. They decided to have a cake party. They were charging $1 a cup or $5 a cup, or whatever. Some kid leaves the party, kills somebody or damages somebody. They came back, State Farm, Nationwide, whoever it was, comes back and says, nope, we're not providing coverage. You guys charge for the alcohol. So just
as long as you don't.
That's what the exclusion says. The exclusion says, hey, we're amending the liquor liability exclusion to say this only applies if you are charging or manufacturing or requires a license. We have some properties down in D.C. This particular jurisdiction, they require a license if you have a party of so many people or more. They require a liquor license.
Really?
Once it requires a liquor license, they have to go out and buy separate coverage. And this D.C. is a different world. But,
oh my God! Like another country.
It was a large condo, but they had rented out a facility, and I think this particular facility, I don't know, maybe because of the way it was defined, they required a license. So once you require a license, you got to go out and buy it separately.
That would be difficult in the state of Maryland. You just get a liquor license.
So in most cases, I'd say a license is not recommended. The other thing that you can do is pass on that liability, and if you really want to have a party, get a professional bartending crew that has their own liquor liability. Get a certificate, be named as an additional insured on their policy.
Okay.
So this is just liquor liability stuff. It's just something that you'll get asked if they say, hey, are we covered if we provide alcohol? Say, don't charge for it. We have host liquor liability. We should be okay. Let me check with the agent. But you can give them a reasonable, informative answer. But the second they start charging for it, hey, we're going to have a fundraiser, we're going to have a wine tasting or a beer, we're going to have 5 micro brews come in and we're going to do tasting. Just don't charge for it. Don't even have money associated with it. We had one down in Wilmington. We got 6,000 units on the coast. Largest HOA in North Carolina that we insure. Every year they have these fundraisers to support local organizations. And they have live music, and the HOA pays for the live music, but in order to try to recover some of that cost, they sell tickets. And then they have wine and beer inside so we had to sort of tell them it could be construed that buying that ticket was paying for the alcohol.
Everything
So
that was
Right.
inside of that bathroom.
Right. So that's the liquor liability. You guys may not get a whole lot of questions on that up here because there's not a lot of pools, and that's where usually the questions start popping up is the BYOBs at the pool. If somebody slips and falls or drunk and we allow the beer, are we covered? Christmas time up here is probably the bigger thing. If they have a community Christmas party or something like that, just tell them not to charge for it. They should be okay. But then call the agent. If it's me, email them and say, hey, this question came up. Can you give us written confirmation?
Is this in the policy, or this is something that has to be added?
It should be in the policy. It's typically part of the general liability policy. And what it will show is it will show as a liquor liability exclusion. So it will look like it's not covered, but then you read the exclusion and it says this exclusion doesn't apply if you're not in the business of manufacturing or selling alcohol.
So is that also in your homeowner's policy?
Should be.
Exclusions?
Should be. I'm not an HO3 expert, but it should
Oh,
be.
okay.
It should be in the homeowner's policy as well.
Or what about the condo, like the condo
The HO6.
unit? Yeah, the condo unit owner.
Should be in there, but that's more for if they have a party.
If they have
Yeah,
their own
they have a
party,
party
they
and
have
some-
liquor.
They should have that in there. I'll do some double checking for you.
Oh.
Next question 4 is what do I need to have on my HO6 policy? And this is a moving target. You know, this is sort of this. What I've put in here is here's what I recommend. Here's some other stuff that I recommend, but the base, the minimum standard up here is you need to have enough to cover the $5,000 deductible, which you're responsible for. And then any betterments and improvements that you may have. So if you have a condo that you've put in hardwoods over linoleum, or you put in a gold countertop over granite, whatever the difference is in price from that granite to gold, you would want to insure for yourself. So betterments and improvements at a minimum $5,000 of coverage to cover the deductible. Because you guys are aware that the unit owner is responsible for the first $5,000 from damage out of the unit of origin.
Yeah, I got that question from the association last week.
Right. Who's responsible for it? Or how?
Well, not like that. They actually wanted to go after the homeowner for additional costs. They knew the homeowner had the $5,000, but they thought they could go after the homeowner. But the state of Maryland says that's what the homeowner pays. That's it.
$5,000 max.
The rest is on the
It's a
association.
common expense.
But I don't think they get it. So we were going back and forth. I was like, oh, let me just stop right here.
Right.
You need to talk to an attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't get it. They're not connecting the dots.
Well, they get.
feel like there's some more recovery that they can get.
Well, what they get, they're thinking, they're using, if it's negligence, common sense says that person left their bathtub running for
Right.
10 hours, stopped up, and then they left, or they fell asleep, or whatever. Or they left the frying pan on the stove running and ran out. We had one in North Carolina. They literally left something frying on the stove, thought it'd be okay to go out and pick their kid up and then come back. Fine. So negligence, insurance covers stupidity. And what a lot of these board members think is, well, that was stupid. That wasn't an accident. That was just stupid and negligent. They should have to pay everything.
Mm-hmm.
But when you live in a condo, we're governed by rules and laws. And so a lot of times they're using common sense going, that guy should have not done that. He should be responsible for the whole thing. But the law says, nope, only up to $5,000.
But it seems like, whoever wrote the law, we're basically looking out for the unit owners and not for associations, and they don't give a darn.
Yeah, who's voting? The unit owners are the ones that are voting for them to keep them in. So they're probably most of the time going to be prone to protect those, because the way they look at community association boards as government, and you got to protect individual rights from government. But yes, I agree with you. If my neighbor, flooded my unit because he, left his bathtub on, I'd be like, he needs to pay for all my damage. He needs to pay for his damage. But now our association insurance is going to go up because of him. But that's not the way it works. Other things to look on your HO6 policy, and this is just goodwill. If they ask you, hey, what do I need? From your perspective, the only thing you really care about is that they have the $5,000 and that they've got money to cover their betterments and improvements. Other things to look for. This may help you in your own personal articles floater. If you have jewelry, anything that's worth more than $1,000, I tell people to talk to their personal lines agent to make sure it's either covered specifically under the policy they have, or if they need to get a personal articles floater to cover it, they can do that. Most people think, hey, I've got $500,000 of contents coverage on my condo. If I lose my $10,000 watch, it's covered. Well, then you read the policy when that watch gets stolen, it says, well, we only cover jewelry up to $1,500. We only cover silver up to this amount. We only cover fine art up to this amount. So anything that's worth any amount of money, I suggest making sure you talk to your agent about it and making sure it's specifically covered. The other thing that they can add is a loss assessment coverage. Does anybody have a community that they've had to issue an assessment because there wasn't enough insurance to cover it? Don't see a lot of this, but this article here, the one about the Texas, it doesn't rain in Texas, that'll give you an idea of something that can happen. If you have a shortfall on a liability claim and you don't have enough, the association doesn't have enough money to pay that claim, there's an assessment that's going to be made to each and every owner in order to pay that lawsuit. Loss assessment can help you come in and pay that. So something, if you don't have that on your own policy and you live in a community association or a condo association, something to ask the agent, say how much does it cost to get $50,000 or $100,000 limit of that, and that'll protect you in case the association didn't have enough insurance. You guys get a special assessment to cover that. This will come in and protect you. Not something that they probably will ever ask you, but something that's good to know, and even for your own selves. Question 5, what is hired and non-owned auto and why do I need it? I get this question every year because it's a line item on our proposals. We don't own any autos as an association. Why do we need to have auto coverage? And it sort of says it in the question title, hired and non-owned. So it's not covering vehicles that you own, because you don't have any. It's covering vehicles that are hired or that you don't own. Biggest example I can give you here is, you guys have seminars here all the time for boards. Boards usually arrive here in their own personal vehicle. If a board member is driving to the event, they blow through a stop sign, hit a school bus full of Boy Scouts. Think worst case scenario. A lawyer's going to ask a question and say, well, where were you going? We're going to sue you, the driver, obviously. But where were you going and why were you going there? Well, I'm a board member. I was going for a board meeting. Well, vicariously, they can be pulled together, and now they're going to sue the association because the whole reason he was on the road was to come here. So we always include higher non-owned liability. This sits excess on top of the personal auto insurance that the driver had or the board member had. It can also cover, the example you used earlier, someone's driving through the community, it's a hired vendor. They hit a child crossing the street, but it was hired by the community association. They don't have insurance or didn't have enough insurance. Now they're suing the board because they hired somebody that didn't have enough insurance. This protects you guys. It's probably $200 to $300 a year for $1 million of coverage. I wouldn't sell it. I wouldn't sell a policy without it.
So what about if, like in a homeowner association, I know you deal mostly with condos, somebody's coming in the community to do, well, let's make it a condo.
I do a lot with HOAs too. So
somebody's coming into a community to do work specifically in a member's home and kills a child, and then they want to name the association.
Well, it would be non-owned, so it would trigger coverage, and most likely you guys would be dropped because you guys can't control who's coming in and out of.
Right, you can.
So it's called non-owned auto too. So
okay.
It's not just ones you guys specifically hire, but typically that contractor or potentially the homeowner could be sued. Probably all three. But being sued doesn't always mean it's going to go to court. I mean, it's a lot of times the judge will start dropping people off the lawsuit because it doesn't make sense. but it's good to have. Without it, there's no auto. If you have an auto claim, liability claim, without that coverage, there's just policies considered wrong coverage.
I think a lot of it is the agents are bad and they don't sell you the right thing.
Typically, higher non-dwelling auto is always built in. You would have to physically go in and remove it, and sometimes you can't even remove it. It's just built in. But without
So
it,
it's built in like State Farms and all states.
I'd have to go look. Every policy I've ever seen typically has higher non-dwelling auto in it. It could be possible, but it's something to look for. When you get a proposal in, hey, does this have higher non-dwelling liability? Or if the association owns a couple vehicles, because there's some larger condos that have maintenance facilities and they have maintenance trucks and vans, whatever. You always want to look at that.
Question.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you touched on it yet. I know you mentioned about dogs this morning, but like this morning before I came here, I was on a property and the dog wasn't on my leash. If that dog would have bit me, if, you know, I didn't want to mess up my job or whatever, but if somebody was supposed to be held liable for that,
Typically the homeowner.
the homeowner.
Yeah, whoever's dog it is.
But if the
It's gonna be-
association, if I was going out there for the association,
I think a lot of it would be, well, first of all, if you got bit by a dog while you're working, it's going to be a work comp claim first. The work comp company may try to subrogate against whoever's dog it was. And by subrogate, I mean go back after it and try to get recoup the money. Yep. But typically, you would have to really do a lot of homework to say, did the association know this dog? Has it had issues before? Has it been vicious before? Whatever. You'd have to go through and really do that due diligence to figure out. Association's going to get named. Everybody gets named if it's bad enough, but typically the root of the problem is the homeowner that let the dog out. Association has no control, of a dog being let loose. Now, if the association says, yeah, I've seen that dog running around for 10 straight days and they haven't done anything about it, potentially then there could be some ramifications, but I'm just not a lawyer to be able to go in and say who's going to. But I would say.
But it's like I don't see under any of these coverages that would cover something like that.
Well, general liability would always protect the association. General liability is a third-party claim policy, so it's not like your property where the association has that property. They make a claim to pay for something that benefits them. Third-party claims are, hey, I came on your property and slipped and fell on the black ice. Let's say a contractor comes on site to do some work and snow had not been removed and they slip and fall. Bodily injury from a third party is a general liability claim. Trying to think of another one that we see a lot. Security lights are out. Nobody replaced them. This was one that came up in Florida. Lady got attacked. There's no security light. She didn't see him coming in. The association got sued because they failed to make a safe environment. So those are general liability claims. Typically, third-party claims come against the association for bodily injury or property damage. We had one where a security gate came down on somebody's truck as they were leaving. It just misfired and it came down and cracked the windshield. General liability claim. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so question number 6, what is an umbrella policy? And this is the article. If you look at the Never Rains in Texas, I certainly don't read it now, but if you get bored and you want to, what the article basically says is how much insurance, because you'll get asked this question, how much insurance do I need? And the second you tell them the answer, you're kind of associating yourself with, well, so-and-so only told me I needed $2 million and that would be enough. Then they get sued for $5 million. And they say, well, so-and-so said I only needed 2. What I tell boards is you need to buy as much as you think you need. I can tell you what other boards and other associations that have your similar amenities or your similar size buy, but you tell me what makes you sleep well at night, and I'll go out and get a quote. And then you can decide based on cost and what you think you need, we can blend it together. Umbrella insurance is basically excess liability insurance. So when you look at your base general liability policy, I think with most of our policies require, we supply $2 million per occurrence. So somebody falls down the stairs because a tread wasn't replaced and it rotted, and somebody slipped and fell and they fell down the stairs and they had $1.5 million brain injury, whatever. We have up to $2 million per occurrence. We're fine. But let's say it was a brain surgeon that fell down those same stairs. Now he can't go back to work. His lost income is in excess of $5 to $10 million over the next 10 years. We got a bigger issue. $2 million is not going to be enough. You have to go to an excess policy or an umbrella policy. So an umbrella policy, all it is just more limit to drop down and sit over the per occurrence limits of your general liability policy. We tend to supply $5 million quotes. We can get up to $20 million quotes. It just depends. But in most cases, you'll see from the boards that you insure a $1 million per occurrence limit on their GL. That is standard. $1 million per occurrence, $2 million aggregate, which means you can have a $1 million claim twice a year, or you can have up to however many claims, but only up to $2 million a year. So with litigation getting costlier and costlier, umbrella policies are good spend on money. I would say for $5 million, you can usually get $2,500, $3,000 of premium will get you an extra $5 million of limit in most cases. So if you ever have a board come to you and say, how much do we need? I don't know. Let's get some quotes and you decide what you can afford. Don't ever tell them, I think you're fine at $1 million or $2 million. Just say, well, let's get some quotes, see how much it costs, and then you can weigh. The best thing that you and I can do is provide them a quote, and they say, no, we don't want it, or yes, we do want it. And then that way they can't come back and say, we didn't offer it to them or we didn't talk about it. My biggest fear in the world is coming in after a claim and saying, well, we could have covered that for an extra $1,200. That every single time, well, I would have bought it for $1,200. So we always try to lay out the potential landmines, talk to them about, what their gaps in coverage are, and let them decide if they want to take on the risk or buy insurance for it. Does that answer the question on umbrella? Okay. Question 7, what are non-monetary claims? Everybody knows the two biggest parts of association insurance. You've got your property and liability insurance. So if your building burns down, we want to build it back. If somebody slips and falls and gets hurt, we want to make sure the association is protected. But what if the board makes a decision that somebody doesn't like, and the board gets sued? We call this directors and officers insurance. Is everybody familiar with directors and officers insurance? The only way you're going to recruit good board members is to have good directors and officers insurance, or commonly called D&O insurance. Without good D&O, you're probably not going to get good board members, because board members don't want to be sued and held liable for things and not have an insurance policy that's going to protect them. So non-monetary claims are under the D&O policy. A lot of your standard, State Farm, Nationwide, I've seen a couple other carriers up here, I think maybe Miller's have done some of this stuff, but a lot of the standard D&O that is just endorsed onto the general liability policy doesn't cover non-monetary claims. Non-monetary claims make up about 60% of the claim activity under directors and officers policies. When you think non-monetary, it's exactly what it says. They're demanding in the lawsuit not something that they want money for. They're demanding a decision to be changed. Somebody's not comfortable with a board election. They think the board elections were fixed. Somebody says, I don't like you let somebody paint their house pink, and I can't believe you let them do that. You're only supposed to let them paint it, white, gray, or black, whatever it is. You let somebody have a Rottweiler when our documents only say you're allowed to have Shih Tzus. Whatever. It's a non-monetary claim. They're not demanding money, they're just unhappy with the decision, which is most every claim I've ever seen. But there's a lot of policies that don't cover it. So just for a little more money, you can get coverage that covers non-monetary claims. I prefer standalone policies on the D&O side. What I mean by standalone policy is it's not part of your property and liability policy. There's about 3 or 4 carriers that I like the most. Up here we have a lot of coverage with Foremost, which isn't necessarily a standalone policy, but we go back to the comments that we made before the meeting started. There's a lot of board members just want to buy the cheapest coverage they can. We try to provide a good competitive price with decent coverage. There's always better coverage that some of these boards can buy. As long as you're willing to spend the money, we can provide better coverage. So most of the time, you have the gold standard here, and the really, not so good coverage down here. It sort of meets in the middle. It's like buying wine. Nobody wants to buy the most expensive, but nobody wants to buy the least expensive, so it usually meets in the middle. But anytime they want a different quote on the D&O, usually it's $500 to $600 more if they can get really top line coverage for $500 or $600 more a year. But most people say, well, we haven't had a D&O claim in forever. Why would I want to spend that money? And that's fine, they can do that. But when they do have it and it's not covered, we need to remind them that, hey, we told you you can buy better coverage. But non-monetary claims, you at least at a minimum want to make sure you have that. If you want other reading on D&O, this is a company called McGowan. They're members of Community Association Institute. They're one of 3 or 4 different carriers that we like to use. But the only reason I printed this out is because he writes very good articles on D&O. Just some things to consider. Yeah, what's up, man?
I don't know.
How you doing?
Fine, except I thought this was something else.
You walked into an insurance meeting. You never
Oh
want to do
my
that.
God, insurance! My eyes are going funny.
You never want to do that. But
How's
here's
it's all working.
it's good. I think we're working off just the paper up here. I think I'm not a tech guy, so my thing crapped out on me there. I'm sure I pushed the wrong button up here.
Oh no, it was up for a little while.
Yeah, it was up, then it cut off.
You
So I
just
don't
didn't touch it for so to speak.
cut off on me. But this is a good article, and it's just a quick read, kind of telling you about not all policies are created equal. The non-monetary is just one of the things that I like to look for in a D&O policy, but there's several other things. Who's covered? If it's only current board members that are covered, well, D&O claims take a while to fester. How many times have we heard, or you will hear, well, I'm unhappy, I'm gonna get a lawyer. And they may sit on something for a year or 2 waiting for somebody to fix it because they don't want to go get an attorney. It's going to cost them money. But finally, nothing ever happens. They go get an attorney. The board members that were on the board 2 years ago aren't on the board now, so we want to make sure past board members are covered, future board members are covered, elected board members are covered, appointed board members, committee members, volunteers. More importantly, we want to make sure you guys are covered because the association management company always gets named in the lawsuit. So we just want to make sure the name insureds are as broad as we can make it. The definition of who's insured is broad. But this will give you some insight to all the things you can't get covered under D&O. And like I said, in most cases, boards tend to meet in the middle and buy insurance like they buy wine. They don't want to buy the most expensive. They don't want to buy the cheapest. And this sort of meets in the middle. Question number 8, does my association need work comp? This stems, there's some legislation in North Carolina, it doesn't really affect you, but this stems a lot. I get this question a lot in North Carolina. In North Carolina, the definition of an employee includes a volunteer. And in North Carolina, if you have 3 or more employees, you have to carry workers' comp. So, in essence, every functioning board down there has at least 3 volunteer board members. They have to carry work comp. There is an insurance carrier that's catering to workers' comp for associations. It's about $500 a year. Has a volunteer endorsement on it. So if they have a volunteer day, planting flowers, picking weeds, doing whatever, just menial tasks that they don't want to hire out to save money. Somebody tweaks their back, you know, picking a flower or picking up a bush or cutting yard, whatever. Is that a work comp injury? Potentially. Maryland doesn't have the same laws North Carolina does. But is it a good policy to have? The other thing it covers is, let's say you hire a vendor, you get certificates showing they had coverage. They falsified the certificate, they never had, or they lapsed coverage. Somebody gets hurt and it flows up to the association. This would cover that potentially too. So.
When you're saying when you get the certificate of insurance, there's a lapse? Because you're checking those dates.
You're checking the dates. So first of all, you want to make, when you get the certificate of insurance, you want to make sure you're getting it from their agent. We have a lot. There's some
and that they're not sending it.
You guys probably use top tier subs for the most part. When you guys are referring people out there to go do mitigation, you guys are probably using vetted subs, most likely. But when the association says, hey, I want to hire somebody to come in and do this, and they start looking at cost, and they choose the cheapest guy, there's a lot of times the cheapest guy doesn't have insurance or the right insurance. We've had several circumstances where a certificate of insurance was sent, came from the contractor, it was either falsified. You can do a lot of things with a computer now. You can, or they had insurance and then they didn't pay for it. They lapsed it, but you got a certificate in the meantime, but you didn't get notified that they didn't have insurance any longer. That's an issue too. So one of the reasons we carry uninsured motorists, law says you're supposed to carry it. They go down, in order to get your license, you got to show proof of insurance. Well, I can go show proof of insurance and cancel it the next day and be driving around without insurance. So workers' comp up here is probably not as big of an issue if you're making sure your subs are vetted, they have insurance, they list you as additional insured. Not a big deal, but we do get this. I mean, the purpose of this memo was the top 10 questions that I get asked all the time. Do we need workers' comp?
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
The single, single contractor who just runs around in a pickup truck and does odd job. No staff, no people, just him. He's not required to have workers' comp insurance. When he for his under Maryland law, as far as I know.
Right. It's similar, and that's similar to North Carolina.
Okay.
Three employees or less, you don't have to carry it.
So when the roof falls down on his head, who's responsible for him?
Well, if he's, and I'd have to go and call the Maryland Insurance Commission, which I have a lot of conversations with. But if we had, let me give you the example from North Carolina. North Carolina says, are they a subcontractor? Do you control when they show up to work, what they're doing, how they do it? If they're a subcontractor, it could flow uphill to the association or to the GC that hired them. If they're truly independent, then there wouldn't be any. This guy's responsible for his own. And independent means, hey, I need you to do this job. I don't care when you do it, how you do it. I just want the yard mowed by the end of the week or whenever you can get around to it. That would be considered an independent contractor. And in most cases, if the guy got hurt, it wouldn't flow uphill. But if there's a subcontractor relationship, it could potentially flow uphill. I'll check with Maryland, though. Maryland's got a little different tweak.
That's a very broad definition, because the question, I guess, is what is direction? I mean, if the board member calls and said, hey Mel, I want you to come out tomorrow and put up a fence post over there on Apple Street, and there's a mailbox that's leaning on Bay Avenue, and then so I've been given these instructions, right? And then when I go there,
just a punch list, yeah.
Yeah, I go there and I hurt myself during this process.
Well, if you get hurt bad enough, they're going to try to make a claim against anybody they can, whether it's your general liability insurance for the association, which in some cases the general liability could respond to that. If they're looked at as an employee of the company or a subcontractor of the company, there could be some general liability language that excludes bodily injury to employees because workers' comp is supposed to cover that. But let me check. What I'll do is I've got a phone number of somebody I talked to in the Maryland Work Comp
Because
Commission.
that is very often the case, these little handyman kind of companies.
Yeah, they're not going to pay $2,000 a year
No.
to carry a workers' comp.
They don't carry it, and so the question then becomes, do they just, and maybe under the new
Right.
health plan, they automatically get it,
Right.
but there's no insurance for that. There's no recurring, cost for
Right.
other kind of.
And it's why there's been some. I think that we put an article out. Maybe it's been a little over a year. It was about. I think it was last year about this time. It was on the workers' comp
Right.
piece, and that's why we've had a lot of feedback on it. Is because in the past we didn't have any insurance carriers that wanted to take on associations because there were no employees, there was no payroll, there was no premium to collect for the amount of risk that they were taking on because they were picking up risk from folks like the punch list guys, the plumber that comes on site, twice a year. But let me call the Maryland. I can tell you how it would work in North Carolina. North Carolina would say if there's a subcontractor relationship, it could flow uphill to you guys, and you could have a work
That
comp.
actually happened to us many years ago.
Right.
When we were doing work for the state, actually, and we had workers' comp insurance, and it was an apartment community.
Right.
And one of the things we were contracting with a painting contractor that was already on site when we got there, already under contract, and one of his people fell off a ladder. Did a lot, hurt himself pretty bad. Unfortunately, the painting contractor had no workers' comp insurance.
Right.
So, and the state says, well, hey, we're the state. We don't do that.
Yeah.
So
Who hired
looked
him?
around and
Yeah.
guess who had insurance? Yeah.
It flows uphill until it hits somebody. It's gonna, and that's why we talk about the difference between independent and sub. If there's a relationship, an employee type relationship, you're most likely going to get caught up in it. So it's a great coverage to have. Like I said, it's $550 a year. It's meant to cover volunteers, meant to cover, they don't want you going out and hiring a bunch of uninsured subcontractors because you have workers' comp. But what they want to do is be a backstop in case one of these contractors becomes uninsured and gets hurt. But I'll check with the Industrial Commission or the Work Comp Commission in Maryland and see the responsibility of an independent versus a subcontractor relationship.
That's why it is our policy that if they can't produce a workers' comp certificate and proof of insurance, and they can't produce a contract, then we don't pay them after the first check.
Right.
But the board can override that. The board can say, we want to pay this guy.
Right.
We have a board right now, just to make things interesting, a guy who doesn't have insurance and doesn't have a contract is also board president.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So we're at that point where we're tired of telling you you shouldn't be doing this. We're almost at the point where we're going to tell them they should go away.
Because there's going to be some litigation at some point.
Oh yeah, they're upset. They were very upset with us because we wouldn't cut this guy a check. So finally we said, we're going to cut a check, but here's the reason why you shouldn't be doing that. And everybody now has to rethink whether or not we want to continue with this relationship.
It's tough, because like I said, the biggest responsibility I think new board members come on with is I've got to save my association money. Let's use the uninsured contractor. Let's use the cheapest guy out there. And really that's not their responsibility at all. It's not their responsibility to come in and save the association a bunch of money. Their responsibility is to be prudent and act in a good fiduciary capacity. But a good fiduciary capacity is making smart business decisions and making sure your butt's covered if something goes wrong. And insurance can help with that. Vetting out contractors can help with that, making sure they've got good insurance. If they're paying the overhead for insurance and general liability and to make sure that their trucks are good working, they're going to be more expensive than the guy that shows up in an old beat up truck that may not be around next week when his work falls apart. So try to use good contractors. Make sure you have a written contract, spells out what he's doing it for. Ask him to be listed as additional insured under that contractor's policy. Worst case scenario, we've got general liability coverage. But best case scenario is if a contractor comes on site, does some damage, hurts somebody, it's his negligence. We don't want our policy to have to defend that. We want to be listed as additional insured under his policy, so his policy pays first. And that's just good contractual and risk transfer type stuff. And a lot of board members don't know risk transfer and contractual stuff, but their attorney or their legal, or you guys may have some experience with that, of how to write a good contractor agreement so that all parties are protected. You agree with that?
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that do handshake deals, and nothing's spelled out, something goes wrong, and there's no contract to revert back to.
Yeah, you can lead a horse to water, it's make a drink. Well, that was working a few minutes ago, by the way.
Yeah, well, it was working when I first came in, but
That's why we asked for these people to have this kind of documentation for the association. It's not really to protect us, because we're not contracting with them.
Right.
And that's another reason why we don't contract for these boards. We don't sign these contracts. They're not contracts with ACM. They're contracts with the community. The community has to take that responsibility on, and we can find them people like Brian and who will explain to them what kind of protection they have, and their attorneys will protect them.
Right.
Protection. But that's what, we have property insurance, liability insurance, D&O insurance, we have workers' comp insurance, and then the big most recently is the
crime fidelity.
Crime and fidelity, yeah. I'm missing the catchphrase, but that which protects the association's fund.
Yep, and that's one of the next questions.
Fidelity insurance.
In fact, it's number 10. I think we're on number 9. Ordinance of law is the next one. What is ordinance of law or law coverage? My neck of the woods, Charlotte, is everything's brand new. There's a few older buildings, but everything is brand new. Everything's built to the new code for the most part. Up here, there's a lot of old buildings. There's a lot of stuff that's 25, 30, 40 years old, sometimes older. A lot of new building codes have been implemented since, whether it's sprinkler protection, whether it's certain type of building materials being used. All sorts of things change over time from the way a building's got to be built back. If you have a building burn halfway down, there's some jurisdictions, there's some municipalities that say, well, you now have to build that thing back to the new code. Well, that costs more money. And it's certainly going to cost money to tear the undamaged portion down. Insurance is not meant to tear down stuff that's not broken. So there's extra cost. Ordinance or law coverage is an important coverage for buildings that are older. If you've got a building that's 10, 15, 20 years old, you always want to make sure there's some sort of protection, either to tear down the undamaged portion, to remove and demo the portion that got damaged, and then to build cover the extra cost to build it back to code. Any questions on that at all?
So that would be like a condo that was probably built for the lead-based paint laws went into effect.
Lead-based paint, asbestos, didn't have sprinklers. Now it's got to have sprinklers, all sorts of stuff. But if here's a good rule of thumb. If it's 15 years old or older, you want to make sure you've got this coverage. I always say it's a cheap coverage anyway. You want to make sure you got it on everything, because you don't know when they're going to transact legislation and say, now you got to do this, now you got to do that. So even a new building could have some exposure. But typically it's the older buildings that are going to have the most exposure to having to rebuild back to code, or, hey, this building's 35 years old, it got damaged this much. Our law says that you have to tear it down and restart over. There's an extra cost to that, so we want to make sure we prevent that. Typically you see limits of up to $300,000, maybe $500,000 for that. A lot of times you'll see agents come in and say, yeah, we've got that coverage, but they're only relying on what's built in or thrown in, and that could be $25,000, it could be $10,000, not a lot. But they can check the box and say, yeah, it's covered. So anytime I see a building built back in the 80s or early 90s, we always ask, hey, we need to get the highest limit we can here. And if they say, hey, that's too expensive, we'll bump it down. But we want to make sure we have it.
Lead paint is an issue now. It wasn't an issue for us until 2012. Actually, the law went into effect, I think, last year, I think. But the bottom line was that they moved the date up for construction to 1979. So anything built before 1979 now, there's a possibility that it has lead paint. Then if we have a condominium that was in fact built then, and there were very few, but there were a lot of apartment buildings that were built prior to 1979 that were eventually converted to condominiums. And that's where the exposure is. The exposure for the condominium is, believe it or not, the common elements, and only the common elements, not the units. If you're gonna live in a unit that's full of lead paint and you own it, then you own the liability of the lead paint. If you have a unit that's in a condominium and you rent it out, Maryland law comes in, and that requires that every time the unit is turned over, it has to be inspected for lead paint. Now the question is, and it has not yet been tested, and there has not been a definition given by whoever gives these definitions as to, okay, so the unit is turned over, that's going to be inspected by the unit owner. What about when the person comes out of the doorway, into the hallway, down the steps, and out the front door of the garden-style condominium, the mid-rise condominium? Who has liability there? The unit owner's liability stops at his door, except for his shared responsibility of ownership that he has under the declaration. So who has the responsibility for maintaining the staircase and the door frame and all the other things that could produce lead dust? Especially when we've learned in recent years that manufacturers of metal staircases routinely sprayed those units on the production line with an undercoat that contained lead. It's there, it's buried deep right down there next to all the rust. That's where the lead is. So the question then becomes, who has responsibility for that? It's our opinion that if you're going to have rental property in your condominium, it's just my opinion. It's not a legal opinion. And somebody has their apartment inspected. It would probably be a good idea for the association to also have the common areas inspected. But not every time somebody moves in, move out, but in accordance with typical of an apartment building under the Maryland regulation once every 2 years. That in and of itself should give the association pause when they're thinking about whether or not they should do a rental policy in a garden style or mid-rise condominium. They've got to think about, am I going to have to spend this money to get this thing inspected? And whether or not they're peeling paint anyway. Now, I've talked to some other lawyers, some other management company people and lawyers, and they say, well, we should make the homeowner responsible for not only inspecting his house or his unit, but the landing and the stairwell and the elevator doors and the laundry room doors and whatever else is in that common area of the condominium. Maybe the pool house and the clubhouse. You can really get crazy with this stuff. And the question, of course, no homeowner, no unit owner is going to, they're not going to do that. So the question then becomes, what do we do? Now we're still waiting for the state to decide, what's the threshold here for the condominium? What is the condominium's responsibility? Because the guy in 3B could rent his apartment today. We went up and inspect the common area, and the guy in 1A.
Do you have to do it again? Yeah.
We can have inspectors on roller skates. So that's not the solution. So what is the solution? Is there a time frame? Once every 5 years? Once every 2 years? Once there's got to be some process. And the problem is because they moved this up to 79, because they learned more about lead poisoning than they knew before. Now the threshold for lead poisoning has been seriously reduced, by hundreds of a percent that they've reduced to hundreds of measured microns or whatever that is of lead
per millions
parts
or yeah.
whatever the measurement is, that has been reduced significantly because they think that now that even smaller amounts of lead can cause children to suffer brain damage, and that's where we are. So with the condominium sort of in a tough place, but if somebody says, if you're in a condominium management situation and the board says we should start letting people rent these things out, what we should say is you need to give that, if this community was built before 1979, you need to give that concept a consideration. Because I'm not sure if that were the case, whether the insurance standard building liability policy would cover the condominium.
Total pollution exclusion under the GL policy. So
there you go.
Yep. And that's under the D&O as well. I mean, if it says anything in the claim about mold, lead, asbestos, microbial, there's a big definition. They've pretty much captured anything that can be considered pollution. Totally excluded. You have to buy back a third-party pollution policy. And I have presented some that I've known have had asbestos, that they don't want to afford it or they don't want to buy it. It's just every policy out there has a total pollution exclusion. And that's third-party liability. If you have a tree fall through the roof and it rains in it and mold gets created because of a covered cause of loss, we come in and fix the mold. But if somebody says, hey, I got sick because you never fixed this leaky water pipe and now I've got black mold all in my apartment and my kids are sick, I'm sick, there's total pollution exclusions under the GL.
So it's really a time element in here. It has to be directly related to the event that just occurred.
From a standpoint of it could be somebody. There's no event. There's no covered cause of loss. It's just, hey, I've got mold in my, it's just in my unit, or I've got lead paint. Now I'm sick. There's no really covered loss there. It's not a fire, not wind damage, none of that. It's just if somebody says I'm sick because of some pollutant, it's not covered.
It's not covered.
And that's.
But what is covered? The removal of the.
So let's say you have a covered cause of loss, and the biggest one I use is you have a pipe burst, and we've had a lot of pipe bursts with the cold winters we've had. You have a pipe burst, things get wet, takes a while to get it fixed, mold starts happening. You usually don't get a lot of mold in the wintertime, but you can. Mold starts occurring, they come in, they fix the damage, they tear out the mold. But if mold's just there because it's there, somebody has a leaky pipe, somebody just didn't maintain their unit very well or whatever, and they say, well, I'm sick or my kids are sick now because a condensation line was dripping down, not covered. If mold's just present because mold's just poor maintenance, not covered. But if we have a tree fall through the roof or we have a water pipe burst, something along those lines, we're going to come in and clean up the mold.
Yeah. Ruth Ann had one here a couple of years ago with a shower that was in the master bedroom. Precast kind of fiberglass plastic things. But it's in the corner of the master bedroom, so I guess if you really need a shower in the middle of the night, you can just go shower. And so this guy, it was a board president, and he bought it that way.
Yeah. And
the shower was all caulked in nice and tight, looked nice. Never saw anything. The guy downstairs, he had kids downstairs. He was a single father or something. And he's complained that the wall was changing color. And he let our people in. One time they went in there and he said the whole place looked like a flower. It was just all these brilliant colors, and kids were running around, and purples and blues and blacks. And it was just all mold along the ceiling and down these walls. And now the man was not well downstairs. I mean, he was, I don't know, maybe he was there for too long.
Right.
What was happening was the shower was never, from construction, was never connected to the sewer line. So when the water came out,
it was just dripping in the wall.
It just stayed in, and it never came out into his bedroom because the shower was a single unit was caulked in. It just penetrated the area around the drain, and then finally went down into the ceiling and ran downstairs. None of that was covered.
Well, you don't have really a covered. None of the cleanup of the mold was covered.
None of it. They had to replace it. I'm pretty
So
sure
if it happens over time, so that's the
it
other.
happened over time.
So-
that was the issue. That's
so-
why I was asking you about time.
So what we call that is saturation, or so if I had this in my own house here this past January, my house was built about 8 years ago. They're putting up the little molding, the chair rails or whatever, and they just pop those nails in. They go as fast as they can. Well, one penetrated a drain pipe. Well, over 7 years, these things rust out and they pop out. It seals it for a long time. You don't have any issues. But over 7 years, it wiggled its way out, finally popped out. Every time the toilet upstairs got flushed, it was coming down. Well, I have 3 kids, 2 2-year-olds that like to ride the little tricycles in the house. And our wood floors in our dining room, it sounded like they were going over a rumble strip. I'm like, what the heck is that? And all my hardwoods had started cupping. You couldn't see any water damage, but it was getting underneath it. So the claim adjuster came out and said, well, I'm not sure if this is going to be covered. You know, this has been going on longer than a period of 10 or 15 days, which is typically the time element that you have. So when you start noticing water, report it immediately. Get somebody out there to address it immediately. Because what you don't want to do is, well, I'm not sure what that's about. And then you let it go and you let it go. And instead of it being a $5,000 claim, now it turns into a $50,000 claim. That's why the insurance company tends to exclude that. That sounds like what it was.
Oh, yeah, this has been leaking since they took the first shower.
Right.
Because it was never hooked up. And this is now 3, 4, 5 years later.
Right.
And so every time this man got the urge to take a shower at night, then he would dump water down in the ceiling with the guy downstairs. And the problem was that the guy downstairs was not working with a full deck, and so he wouldn't let anybody in to fix it.
Right.
He wouldn't let our people in construction.
And he probably didn't even mention it the first time he noticed it.
No, he
Right.
didn't. Yeah, they only said that you see any water.
Right.
And they opened the door and they could see it. And finally, the only way that they got him to do that, and this is a long, I'm sure everything will tell you the whole story if you have. But what happened was they had to go to court and child protection to get the county involved because he had children.
Right.
And they were living under those conditions, and finally, they had other family members had to come and take
The kids.
children away, so they could eventually deal with him. But they put him away.
I think that the moral of the story.
But it was not covered
Yeah.
because of the time element.
There's a time element with water, with pipe leaks. The second you start seeing any evidence of water damage, you need to let the insurance company know right away, because they'll put a time on it and say, well, this has been doing this for 3 weeks. We're not covering the damage anymore because now it's compounded, and instead of it being 5,000, it's 20,000. So something to think about.
Yeah, when we've had your insurance presenter number 3, and the other one said that actionable elements are they're a sudden event. There's something that we need to have.
Accidental and sudden. Yep. So you're exactly right. So anything, not that the pipe wouldn't be, a broken pipe would be covered, or should be covered, depending on the circumstances. But broken pipe should be covered, but the damage resulting from that broken pipe is typically, you're going to have to notice it pretty quickly. The second you notice it, you need to report it. Question number 10, this goes back to the fidelity bond. This is a law now. What a fidelity bond does, it's basically employee dishonesty, protects the funds of the association from either a board member running off with it, a property manager running off to Bermuda with it, and starting a new life. In most cases we hear, well, that can never happen because board members don't have signing authority, or there's some rules of engagement to protect the funds and how they get either dual signature or whatever. But these things happen where funds get stolen. In most cases, the law only says We just need to protect the association's funds from the board members stealing it. However, in today's world, computer theft, computer fraud, all these other things are more prevalent. You know, somebody sitting over in South America can track keystrokes now as you're doing online banking and get your routing number, your PIN number, your passwords, and get in there and move money around pretty quickly. Or create fraudulent checks, or if the community has a credit card, can figure out credit card numbers pretty quickly. These guys are smart. So we do offer fidelity bond. Typically, it's 3 months of dues, and 12 months, or 3 months of dues, and 100% of the reserve account is typically what the formula says that we need. So it's always a moving target. Where you see this most is banks calling in saying, I need your fidelity bond coverage because your FHA approval says you have it and this is the limit you have to have. We get that all the time. We also get the fact that it's just Maryland law. But there's nobody checking up on Maryland law. It's the banks calling in and mandating that it be covered. So just a good rule of thumb. And this is a cheap coverage. But some other things to think about are adding on the computer fraud, adding on the credit card fraud, adding on some other ticket items. Crown coverages can be as small as just covering the employee dishonesty, or they can get larger and cover computer fraud and some other things. So, any questions? That was number 10. So I know you guys are busy. If you've got 2 or 3 minutes, I'll tell you what makes up a good risk, especially from a condo standpoint. When you guys are shopping your insurance for condos, every insurance company is going to want to know what the last 3 to 5 year loss history is. They want to know if it's a good risk. They think the past is an indicator of the future. If you've had 10 water leaks in the past, they think you're going to have 10 water leaks in the future. If you've had 2 frozen pipes in the last couple of years, they're going to want to know, hey, what have you done to make sure that doesn't happen again? We've had several communities that have put in new insulation, whatever they can do to help make that not happen. That'll be a question that comes up with every underwriter. There's not a lot of carriers out there that are actively seeking condo insurance right now. There's just been a lot of claims. Condos are getting older. Anytime you get an older building, you tend to have more issues with maintenance and repairs. So there's a lot of questions that come up with the older buildings. The other thing that makes you a good risk or a better risk when you're applying for insurance is, hey, we just had our roof replacement, or hey, we just did this whole reconstruction project where we replaced the siding with a hardy plank that used to be maybe a cedar, or wood siding. We just replaced all the plumbing, or we did this electrical work, whatever. Anything that you guys have done as a capital improvement that makes you a better risk or newer construction, let us know. Obviously, a condo that's sprinklered and protected by, from fire, better than another one is looked upon better. Here in Maryland, there's laws that say new condos have to have sprinklers. What our underwriters have noticed, though, is these sprinklers are more for life safety than they are for fire protection. They don't extend to the attic. If they don't extend to the attic, a lot of carriers like Travelers, like Foremost, Philadelphia, don't want to give you the sprinkler credit because it's not really going to protect it from burning down. Once a fire gets up in the attic, it can spread. And they're called, what's called R at the end. It's a residential sprinkler. So if it doesn't extend to the attic, the carriers want to know that.
So condos have attics?
Not condos necessarily, but there's townhomes that have attic space.
So
So when you get to the top level, there's usually a sprinkler head here and a sprinkler head that will come up.
Right.
If there's not one going up, just one coming down into the living area, then insurance carriers aren't necessarily wanting to give the sprinkler credits. In fact, we've had a couple pull back once they've inspected them. If they're not being annually inspected and made sure that they're in good working order, that's the other thing that we get kicked back on. It's good for life safety because it gives people time to get out, but if the building still burns down, the insurance carrier is still paying to put it back, so they don't necessarily want to give that credit unless it's truly a fully sprinklered building. Something else to think about too, this has happened up here before where those sprinkler pipes have frozen. If at any time the sprinkler is not in working order, they've had to cut it off. You need to make the insurance company aware, hey, we've temporarily had to cut this off. There's language in the policy that says if we're giving you a sprinkler credit and the sprinkler doesn't come on when there's a fire, then we have some reason to exclude the claim. So if you ever have to turn it off, send a note to the agent and say, hey, we temporarily had to cut this off. Had frozen pipes that burst. We're mitigating that damage. So there's no working sprinklers right now. We're on fire watch or whatever we're on. Just let them know you've done your part. Any other questions at all? I know this has sort of been a little longer than I wanted, but I'll answer any questions that you guys have.
I have one question. How, in reference to claims, say an association has already had 2 claims, and then they get a 3rd claim. Will the insurance company?
It's different. It's everything's looked at on a case-by-case basis. So a lot of times if somebody's paying $50,000 a year for insurance and they've had 3 $2,500 claims, probably not going to be a big issue. If they've had 5 or 6 of those $2,500 claims, maybe they're going to go up on price a little bit. I don't know that they would get off the property. But if they continue to year in, year out have claims and become unprofitable for an insurance company, and what I would say what defines profitable, 60 to 70% is break even. So if you have a $100,000 premium and they're paying out $60,000 or $70,000 in claims every year, you're break even, you're not making money for the insurance company. Either they're going to go up in price or get off of you altogether. If you have a lot of small claims and they think, oh my gosh, we have an issue up there, one of these small claims is going to turn into a big claim at some point. It could happen. Our job is to go out and find additional quotes when necessary. We don't necessarily want to shop it every year because if you're an underwriter, think about it this way, if you're an underwriter and you see the same condo coming on your desk every year and you never write it, you're going to be like, I ain't working on that this year. I'm just going to decline it and move on to something I've got a good opportunity on. So we don't necessarily want to shop it just to shop it every year. If there's a reason to shop it, if rates are going up higher than what we think they should go up, or if there's been a lot of bad claims and we don't know what the insurance company's going to do yet, then we'll send it out to market for you.
So we should be probably shopping for insurance way before the renewal.
Our renewal date's September 15th for most of the properties we do for you guys. I think we do about 20 to 25 properties for you guys. We start looking at it in July. We've already heard back from the underwriters. With the exception of the 2 that are getting non-renewed because of claims, we've already heard back from the underwriter, 3 to 5% increase is what we're looking at. And that's usually right around what is average. So 3 to 5%, we come in and say, okay, this is what we're looking at. Is this acceptable to the board? Has this been budgeted for? If not, then we go out to market for it. But we don't want to go out, if it's a reasonable renewal, we don't want to inundate the marketplace just to come in with 5 different quotes and burn up, because at some point we're going to need the underwriters to do us a favor and actually quote something because we need them, and we don't want them to decline it because they've seen it the last 10 years in a row and didn't get it, if that makes sense.
Question, is there a time frame to getting a claim after the flood damage has happened? Like you said, we have a lot of claims damages that happened back in February, and I have somebody call me, this is what, July.
Right.
Oh yeah, I need to get this fixed. This happened back in
Well, what we tell people as soon as you're aware of a circumstance that could create a claim, let us know. We can walk you through whether we need to do something or not. In most cases, from our own due diligence and our own protection, if you say, hey, we've got this, what should we do? We're always going to tell you, hey, let's report it. Let's put the carrier on notice so they can't come back and say you didn't report this timely and we're excluding it. So we always want to make sure that anytime we're made aware of a claim, even if it's something that we don't think is going to be covered, put them on notice, because if they come back a year down the road and say, well, I want to report the claim now, there's no evidence that we've ever reported it, then we could have an issue. Hail damage, we just had one in Charlotte. They waited 5 years to report a hail damage claim because they finally got to the point where they were going to need to replace their roofs, and they said, well, we can save $1 million if we get the insurance company to pay for it. It was 5 years ago. The insurance company said, nope, you've only got up to 3 years to come back and file a claim on this.
Those are the houses you ride down the street and you wonder why you got
Blue
boards
tarps
and plastic and tarps on it, and because they didn't.
Hail damage, we had one, we get a lot of hail damage in one part of South Charlotte, and you get some predatory roofing contractors. They just chase that damage, and they'll come in and literally contact the board and say, let me get up on your roof, I can get you a new roof. And they get up there. We have video of one contractor doing damage to the roof before the insurance. We have video of it.
Yeah.
And so you get some contractors out there, which goes back to making sure you're using reputable contractors.
Right.
But yeah, there's what we call hailstorm chasers. They chase the hailstorms around and they just mop up the money. And in most cases, the people that come and sell you the job aren't the ones that they go out and hire subs that hire subs that hire subs to come actually do the work. And in most cases, they end up with a roof that's no better than what they had with all the hail damage because it's not put up by professionals. But anyway, any other questions at all? You guys have a card at all? I'll leave my card up here. If you ever need anything, you can always contact me.
You have more than one?
Oh, yeah.
And about like Canada.
Thank you.